Good evening. The League of Women Voters of Pocatello welcomes you to our 2026 Idaho Legislative Preview. My name is Nancy Lee Hendricks, and I am your moderator for tonight's forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization which seeks to promote active citizen participation in government. Tonight's forum is being aired live on KISU. Recordings of this event may not be used without the express written approval of the League. No part of this League-sponsored video production may be used in advertising or in any way to promote a candidate. The League only permits audio and video broadcasts of this event in its entirety. Pocatello League members have composed tonight's questions. We will not be taking questions from the audience, who will remain muted. Tonight, we have from District 28, Senator Jim Guthrie, Representative Rick Cheatham, and Representative Dan Garner. From District 29, we have Senator James Ruckty, Representative Dustin Manwaring, and we had hoped to have Representative Tanya Burgoyne. We would like to start with your perspective on the most important issues facing Idaho in 2026. What do you see as your greatest challenge or best opportunity for achievement? You have 1.5 minutes, and we'll start with Senator Guthrie.
Well, thank you and good evening. It's good to be here this evening, and the session is upon us. Ready or not, here we come, right? I think the easy answer to the challenge, of course, is the budget shortfall. That's going to be the big one, which I think will be the most important issue. And you got to remember, setting the budget is the only thing we're really required to do, but sometimes it seems like that in our zest, we forget that. We'll also face tough decisions on education policy. Water, I think, is not going to go away as far as discussions on water. You're going to hear some things about immigration, which has potential to have a big impact on the labor force and other infrastructure needs. And there's a lot of other things as well. I will say that too often fringe social issues take too much oxygen out of the room, and the true requirements of our job as lawmakers sometimes become obscured by policy nonsense. Thank you.
Representative Cheatham. You need to unmute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I want to thank the League for your more informal forum tonight. Much more comfortable here at home doing this than it would be in a more formal setting. I have to agree with Senator Guthrie. I think the main issues are going to all revolve around budget issues and forecast of revenue and see how all that's going to work. It's going to affect every bill that comes in front of the legislature. It's going to affect input from lobbyists, local government, because the state's budget affects everything. Education is a great concern to me, particularly rural school districts. I have 6 districts within District 28 that I serve, and 4 of those are rural districts that, frankly, those students are being shortchanged and not being equally treated to larger districts. And I think that's a major issue we're going to have to face this year. Everything's going to revolve around budget. I sit on Revenue and Taxation Committee, and that's where budget and tax issues start. Well, not budget, but tax issues start. And I think that's going to be the major work I have to do in the legislature this session.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
I want to thank you for having me here tonight. I always appreciate these forums. It seems like I learn more than I I knew every time I come. So I appreciate you inviting me. I think they've nailed exactly what the most important issues that we're going to see are. I think education funding and how we fund it is going to be something that'll be talked about and new, and the budget deficit shortfall and how we make that up. And of course, the big, beautiful bill is going to magnify that. It's from what I'm hearing. So those will be the biggest issues, I believe.
Senator Ruckty.
Thank you. Yep. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's going to be the budgets, and let me just take it a step further. If I were in your seats, I'd be pretty upset at the Idaho legislature right now. In the words of the lieutenant governor, we've done this to ourselves. We had budget surpluses as far as the eye could see. Some of that was COVID money and federal infrastructure money, but we did not do a smart job of taking care of that money and making sure that we were investing in Idaho and preparing for our population increases. You know, more population means more roads, it means more schools, and we have squandered that money through a series of tax cuts to the tune of $4 billion in income tax alone over the last 5 years. $450 million tax cut last year alone. We couldn't afford it, and the numbers don't lie. Again, quoting the lieutenant governor, we're in a world of hurt, and we need to wrap our arms around that and get to work to fix the problem.
Representative Manwaring.
Well, thank you. Good evening, and thank you to the league and also to KISU for hosting us. I appreciate this opportunity. I think we're all going to be in agreement that the budget this session is going to be the biggest challenge and the biggest issue. I also think it's going to bring us some opportunity, which I hope to spend a little bit of time talking about tonight, on being creative and how we do this going forward. Our constitutional responsibility is to balance that budget. But I think we're going to really be prioritizing what I call the big three, which is education, our public safety and corrections responsibilities, and healthcare, along with public lands and our resources issues. So while we address that budget deficit, we're still doing so as we deal with rapid population growth that continue to cause strains on housing. And we said water, that was already mentioned before, but that water use continues to have a strain, and so we're still dealing with that issue. So we have what we have in Idaho going into this session, on top of the budget deficit issue that we're going to be balancing, is really I still think we have a serious affordability problem in housing and with inflation, and frankly at the grocery store, and the cost of living for many of our Idahoans is an issue that we have to take serious and figure out how we're going to continue to deal with. And frankly, that's one reason that I have been able to support tax cuts in the past, as we've seen inflation rise and putting more money back into the pockets of Idahoans to afford things that are just too expensive. But we are going to be dealing with how we fund education, how we protect individuals' rights, ensure access to health care, and we'll continue to work on those issues.
Thank you. And now to our first question. Last year, the Idaho legislature passed the budget without determining the state revenue, resulting in a projected budget deficit of $58 million. The 2026 federal budget bill could reduce Idaho revenue even further. Some legislators want to use Idaho's rainy day fund to make up the difference. Since it is against the Idaho Constitution to have an unbalanced budget, how do you plan to address this year's budget deficit? Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. It currently appears that the projected deficit is declining. It started out much larger. It's been gradually declining as revenue has come in. The revenue increases were larger in November and December than they thought they were going to be. Every time I read an estimate of that potential deficit, it changes. We've had a lot of different ideas about how we can maintain the balanced budget constitutional requirement. Some of those include postponing the 2025 tax cut enactment date, canceling the $50 million education tax credit, and not completely conforming to the One Big Beautiful Bill, what they're calling OB3 this session. I sat on the Revenue Tax Committee, which is where taxation changes originate. So these are things I'm going to be closely following and study proposals as they come forward. I am not in favor of using the rainy day fund to solve the budget planning process. Those revenues, those rainy day funds, should not be used to manage revenue insufficiencies during the fiscal year or pay for unforeseen budget expenses or emergencies. I feel the state should plan to match the revenue projections and the expenses and only use rainy day funds if revenues decline below projections or if there's a need for an unexpected expenditure or cost increase.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I should just say I totally agree with everything Representative Cheatham said. I don't agree with spending the rainy day funds to make up the deficit. It is getting smaller as we get closer to the beginning of session. Last estimate I heard, I think, was 20. It might come in at 28 million or less, and I'm definitely hopeful that that's what will happen. Representative Cheatham mentioned 2 or 3 options we have to make that balanced budget without using the rainy day funds. I think we can do that. And I'll be quite frank, there are some programs that we can cut that really will help our budgets, and it shouldn't affect the citizens of Idaho. The state is actually providing a few services that are provided by private entities that are in the state or outside of the state. And for some reason, the state has decided to step into that arena, which didn't need to happen. And I think we can cut those programs and the private sector can still pick up on those. And that'll definitely will help on the budget.
Thank you. Senator Ruckty.
Well, I think first we need to talk about budget deficits. When we're talking about this fiscal year, the number that every time we get revenue in each month and it's reported, it's anywhere from 45 million to the high 50s. After about 3 months, I think it was, the governor implemented holdbacks, 3% for all agencies, didn't affect K through 12, 4% for Medicaid. If he hadn't done that, our current budget deficit would be around $110 million. That's how badly we whiffed this, how badly we missed. And keep in mind, at the end of last session, the governor, the speaker, others were running around crowing about the fact that we had a $450 million budget surplus. Well, it just wasn't true, or 400 million. It just wasn't true. The numbers don't lie. And as the numbers started coming in, immediately everybody could see, no, we have deficits. Now, that's just this fiscal year. When we talk about the fiscal year we're going to be planning for when we go to the session this year, we're talking about 450 million. If you want to put a little on the top to make sure we've got some cushion, we need to find $600 million. Those aren't my numbers. That's the governor's budget office's numbers. 600 million to $1 billion, depending on what we do with the big beautiful bill and tax conformity, because that could be another 200 to 300 million. So we've got ourselves a real problem. We're talking about 600 million to $1 billion that we've got to find, or we've got to cut our way out of it. And if we're cutting that kind of money, we're talking about 20 to 30% cuts to budgets. It's extraordinary. We will cut to the bone, and it will take us a decade to get back to where we are now.
Thank you. Representative Munwaring.
So we can cut spending, we can raise revenue or through tax increases. We can utilize some of our rainy day funds. I don't see this legislature as having an appetite to raise taxes. And Senator Ruckey did a good job of kind of stepping back and talking about how when we come into legislative session, we're always balancing budgets the year back, the current year, and the year forward. And, so we will balance both of those budgets, the current year and the year forward going before we leave session. And we have a lot of work to do to make up those shortfalls. When we left session, the anticipated budget surplus was about $400 million. And so we were way off on those projections, and we have seen some of the revenues slip. We've seen some of the income tax, in particular, corporate income tax revenue not meet where we thought it would be. But I anticipate a combination of additional reductions in spending. We're not going to be funding transportation initiatives like we thought we may have been, and $175 million that we thought we might be doing again. That's not going to happen. We're not going to see subsidizing property tax relief like we've done in the past. So we're going to have to figure out, and I think we're going to be figuring out if we're going to conform to all or some of that one big beautiful bill. And one of those ideas is that we perhaps, maybe just offer those tax credits to businesses that are headquartered in Idaho, and not those that are headquartered elsewhere that are paying taxes in Idaho. So there are ways to try to thread that needle, but it's very costly, frankly, to conform, but it's also costly not to conform. If we try to catch up to conformity years down the road, sometimes we never get the opportunity to do that. And we have an example of that with depreciation, where we've decoupled and businesses are keeping two separate books, and it's a real pain to businesses in particular, and we just can't afford to catch up anymore. So we're going to have some decisions to make on conformity, but I think it's going to be a combination of additional reductions. And a lot of this, frankly, we got here too by some of the reductions in Medicaid and the money coming back to the state, and we're going to be dealing with that.
Senator Guthrie.
Okay, I'll probably have a little different take, and part of my comments are just to make a point, not necessarily anything that anybody listened to, but for starters, let's not do any more damage and place thoughts of more tax cuts on hold. And I say that at the same time when I've heard that there will be more tax cuts folded into the tax conformity bill. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that. So that's troubling. I've even went as far as to suggest the governor's office and the lieutenant governor that we place a stay on the tax cuts that we provided for in House Bill 40, which I voted against, until those economic triggers come to support that. And those could be phased in over time to get to the 5.3. I know that won't go anywhere, but I think it has value in trying to make a point. And I think we should give some consideration to not conforming with all aspects of the big, beautiful bill. The depreciation schedule is problematic because it forces us to catch up what was metered out over 5 years to catch up in 1 year, which is a big hit in that first year. And that's one way they could do some things that would help. As far as the rainy day funds, the governor indicated in his address to the Associated Taxpayers in early December that, in his opinion, it wasn't raining. He said there's a couple of clouds on the horizon. I think it's a little more stormy than that. The economy in Idaho, which is still strong, would lend truth to that statement. It's not raining if you look at the economy, but the facts are the facts. We implemented major tax cut policy without a revenue number last year. I mean, who does that? We did it. And I still find that unbelievable. And that's part of the reason I did vote against both the House Bill 93 and House Bill 40, which was a $255 million income tax cut. I think if we're not willing to admit our mistakes and address the problem from the perspective that I've kind of outlined there, then we are limited in options and may very well end up entertaining some discussions about using the rainy day funds to be made whole. I don't know if I agree with that. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Now on to our next question. Funding of public education is required by the Idaho Constitution. House Bill 93 will give parents taxpayer money for tuition at private schools without regulation, oversight, or requirement to educate all children. Idaho's largest online charter school has misused millions of taxpayer dollars. Please address public education funding, tax money going to private schools, accountability for private and charter schools, and support for special needs children. Representative Garner.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I think it's widely known that I did not support House Bill 93. I'm not in favor of vouchers or tax credits given for education, especially when it's a tax credit that if you are not do and don't have to pay taxes, that you still get that money. I wish there would have been more oversight in House Bill 93. I'm hoping that some bigger sideboards will be put on it. I hope that's not wishful thinking, but I think it probably is. I'm trying to think of what the rest of the question was. Education, I think we need to really look at the funding for education, because if we've got colleges cutting programs, I think we're going backwards, because the kids are our future. And if we don't educate our kids up to the standards that they at, Idaho and the whole nation will be sliding backwards. So I'm very concerned about that. The special needs. We have got a huge gap in Idaho between what is required by Title 9, and special needs students. It's a huge gap. We've always had that gap. There's just not the money there. We are not providing the money that is required by Title 9. There was a small bill that came last year to allow a very small amount. It was, I think, $30 million that was supposed to go to special ed students for the worst of the worst. And we have to educate the legislators, because I sat there in that education committee, and when they were testifying of why they needed that money so badly, it bring up that these are the kids that are just sometimes are out of control and have to be restrained, and they get hit. The teachers get hit and bit. You could see in the legislators on the committee faces that they weren't understanding, and some of them actually said, "Why are they in school? Why don't we just kick them out?" Well, we're not allowed to do that.
Okay,
My
thank
apologies.
you.
My
Yeah.
chat was disabled, and so I'm sorry,
Thank you.
Representative.
I'm sorry. I apologize for being so passionate.
No,
about
it's I had no idea. It disabled, and then it let me in, but not long enough for me to get a keystroke in. So my apologies.
Okay, thank you very much. We're all volunteers here, working as hard as we can. Thank you, Representative Garner. Senator Ruckty, for 2
Thank you. I
minutes.
also voted against the voucher bill, the tax credit bill. Frankly, I have a really tough time believing that we actually pass that bill in the legislature. This is why. We've got our hands full just with the public education system that we have trying to fund it. And as you've heard from the previous questions about budget shortfalls, you cannot cut 600 million out of a budget without touching public education in Idaho, because that's about 60% of our general fund budget. So you just can't do it. It's going to be affected, and this voucher bill sends $50 million to private and religious schools without oversight on how that money is spent. We should not do that with any other taxpayer funds. Private schools and religious schools, if you want to send your kids those schools, that's fantastic. You've got one opportunity to educate your kids in life. And if you choose to go to private schools, religious schools to do that, or homeschool them, that's fantastic. But if you're going to accept public taxpayer dollars, then the public deserves to know how those monies are being spent. We don't know that with vouchers. In other states that have used voucher programs, those programs grow exponentially and very quickly. So they go from a $35 million program to a $1 billion program. Even in Utah, I think Utah started with a $50 million program, and very quickly it got up well over, $100-200 million. So it's just the nature of these programs. They continue to suck public dollars into them. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Representative Manwaring.
So for two reasons, I wouldn't be able to support expanding that credit this session. One is we have the budget issue that we've already been talking about. The other one is we just don't have enough data yet to know how many applied, how many families wanted it or did not receive a credit. And so we're going to have to critically assess, in my opinion, the expansion or retraction based on our budget needs and the requirements that we have in the state, and to just figure out what the demand for that credit will be going forward. I plan to continue to prioritize making sure all of our Idaho families and kids have opportunities and choice in their education. And so I think this is a creative way to make sure we are supporting all kids in their education. I don't think that it means the sky is falling for public education, but at the same time, I do think we have to address critical needs for public education, like special education that's already been raised. We are not doing enough for special education, and that's a very serious and critical issue. I was very supportive of Superintendent Critchfield to try to prioritize not having holdbacks for special ed that she's now retracted. But I think we have to do more, and we have to take a step back with that too and say, why do we have more special needs students in our public schools? And is this contributing to that? And if it is, we have to take that issue seriously, and we have to fund it and pay for it. And I take responsibility for that, and I commit to doing that going forward.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
As far as education funding, yes, I support more funding for education, but it can't be just about the funding, because when you look at Idaho, we've done a pretty good job over the past several years stepping up our public education funding commitment. But in today's environment, guarding against further dilution of that critical funding stream will be probably as important as appropriating more money. You know, when you look at public schools, they have to provide the full complement of curriculum for all students that range from severely special needs to proteges and everything in between. And when you look at the carve-outs, they don't have that same expectation or requirement. So focusing on where the money is truly needed to up that student achievement will be important, more important than just more money. No, as far as House Bill 93, I've already mentioned I voted against that, and I don't believe in expanding that. I don't think that's good for Idaho at this point, at least not in that form. As far as the other questions, I think House Bill 93 has some accountability problems. I don't think there's enough sideboards on it. And then you couple that with the online problems that we've seen, we've got some serious work to do if we're going to continue to spend public dollars for education choice. The problem becomes that with more regulation, more reporting requirements, that can detract from the human and financial resources needed for classroom time. So there's a trade-off there. The special needs area, I think we do have to step up financially for that. Well, we talk to school districts, and that is paramount on their radar screen. Their increased requirements that these needed services, they've increased pressure on school district budgets, many cases far exceeding the reimbursements. And we need to look at testing to make sure that we haven't set that bar too low to where the program eligibility has become to where more students are getting into maybe what should be. But on the other end of the spectrum, allow districts a year-end appeal process so they can get more funding if through documentation for extraordinary student needs. Thank you.
Representative Cheatham.
Thank you, Nancy. You know, as legislators, we frequently hear from school districts about the problems they're having meeting the requirements of state and federal regulations within the current funding formulas. The imbalance of funding available to urban versus rural schools really astounds me. The requirements don't change, just the availability of funding through federal, state, and local sources. I don't think Idaho provides an equal opportunity for education to rural students, and we need to fix that. I'm not in favor of the educational tax credit program that went into effect. That's House Bill 93, and I voted against it. It doesn't fairly distribute the $50 million. At least it doesn't appear it's going to. And it adds an additional expense to the budget for which I don't see a need. I will hope to be able to help tighten controls on fraud and misuse of taxpayer money to better ensure education dollars go where they're needed. And there's no doubt in my mind that special needs education for Idaho students is badly underfunded. Those students' needs should receive specific consideration based on the severity of the need and appropriately funded to fill the need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to the next question. Today, Idaho incarcerates more women than any other state, with most in for nonviolent drug crimes. Investigate West reported that some prison staff sexually abuse female prisoners and conceal the crime, leaving victims vulnerable. Inadequate support of female prisoners leads to higher recidivism. Please discuss the incarceration rate of women in Idaho prisons, the abuse and harassment of female prisoners by prison staff, and the reduction of recidivism. Senator Ruckty.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a broad question, really hits on a couple of different areas. We clearly do have high incarceration rates for women in Idaho. It's a problem that it's a complicated issue to address. I think we've had a decade or two of making various violations of the law punishable by felony, which leads to higher incarceration rates. There's a number of factors that are behind that. As to the abuse of prisoners issue, I mean, I think the League of Women Voters and those of us on the call are aware of a series of articles that were done. I think the publication is Investigate West. I've met with Director Bree Derrick. She's with the Idaho Department of Corrections. She's the director, and talked to her about this specifically. I was pretty satisfied with her explanation of what was going on, but because this is such a serious issue, because especially incarcerated female prisoners are vulnerable. I think we need to have the Office of Performance Evaluation do a study and just find out what was going on or what is going on in our prison population. Make sure that that when there are allegations of abuse, that those are handled appropriately, and essentially find out, is there any there? And I'm on the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. I think every one of us on this call has used the Office of Performance Evaluation to get some really fantastic studies done, evaluations done, to tell us what's going on in government. And so that's what I would propose we do.
Thank you very much. Representative Manwaring.
Well, I serve on our Joint Finance Committee, and one of the assignments I have is to work with the corrections budget and to get to know their management and their processes. And I'll just tell you, I mean, as legislators and as someone that lives in Pocatello, we have the women's prison here. We don't tolerate abuse or harassment. And if there are things that we can do by doing more, reporting or investigating to figure out what's really going on, we're gonna try to do that. And it could be through our Office of Performance Evaluations, but if there's also funding decisions that will help motivate or improve behavior or help with training or keeping prisoners and staff safe, then I'm going to give that serious consideration. And the prison world is just that. I would say it's a different world, and we are constantly trying to prioritize safety with adequately protecting the public. But I'll tell you, I mean, Senator Ruckty said he had interviewed, some of the staff or the director. I've interviewed the warden here, and I've met her locally, and I have trust that she cultivates a culture of respect in the prison here, and that's foundational piece. And it starts at the top. And so I have that trust in her that it's not happening here, and she will tamp that out. But we really have to get to the bottom of this and stay on top of it.
Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
As far as laws, I guess, aside from changing the code as to what's a crime, what's not, the short or the low hanging fruit, I guess, is to do a better job in the prison programs that provide for a more successful transition back into society. But the problem is you everything along those lines costs more in terms of money and manpower. And while the other part of the question, while there's no doubt true that childcare, housing, employment, and healthcare needs are key for this population that we're trying to integrate back into society, everyday citizens, law-abiding citizens are struggling with the very same things as well. So that becomes a problem for all of society in today's world. There's a lot of talented people working on these issues, but it seems like the need outstrips the resources. As far as women being abused in prison, I'm going to go a little further and think that maybe that should carry a stiffer penalty than crimes like that in the free society, because they are some of our most vulnerable. They're susceptible to coercion and an easy target. And I would support an audit or an OPE study to identify the scope of the problem and adjust the code where it makes sense to further deter this behavior. As far as what else could we do aside from what I've already mentioned, I'm wondering if we could do some incentives for women prisoners to where they could testify against traffickers and others involved in the illegal drug culture, which if you look at it, about 90% of the women incarcerated are drug-related charges, at least the last I heard in Pocatello here. So it's a big deal. And not to be sexist, but I do believe that men in the drug world abuse and control women and involve them in drug crimes and represent kind of the head of the snake in this situation. So anything we could do to have women kind of help identify some of the other perpetrators would be good to me.
Thank you very much. Representative Cheatham.
Thank you, Nancy. You know, I have to admit, this is an area in which I have virtually no experience, and I have no idea firsthand whether that Investigate West report is accurate or not. I don't know where it came from. I haven't seen the source material. So it creates some concern for me. I know that overall Idaho's jails and prisons are overburdened with inmates. Criminal incarceration breaks up families, not just taking women out of the system, but it also breaks up families and takes men away from families too. I've been told our heavy use, and I was scolded this past week by a little group of attorneys about the heavy use of mandatory sentencing, which they claim is part of the problem by not allowing prosecutors and judges to sentence according to individual circumstances in each case. So, but you know, I look at the abuse and harassment. Those things are obviously illegal or in violation of policy. So I doubt that legislation is going to put an end to them. I don't think the legislature is the right place to take this problem. You know, the solution is removing the offenders that are causing the problem, getting them out of the system. And I have every confidence. I met with the director of corrections last summer at the facility they're building south of town here in Pocatello. And I've met with the warden at the women's prison, and I have every bit of confidence that they are going to get to the bottom of these accusations and help to put an end to it as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. Representative Garner.
Thank you, Nancy. I think I agree with everything that's been said from everyone here. To let you know how bad it is, I've been told that we've got the highest rate in the nation for women incarceration. And we outperform in that area, unfortunately, more than a lot of developed nations in the world. Somehow we need to address that. I do agree that we need an investigation into the abuse that's been allocated. I mean, alleged. Thank you, Nancy. And some of the things have already been talked about that I think might be able to help this. I think we need to revisit mandatory minimums, especially for drug abuses and stuff like that. I think a longer drug rehab program for the women would be beneficial. I've been told that they get them just healthy enough that they think they're okay, but you're right there on the edge where you go back and forth. And obviously, the longer you can help them stay away from that, the better chance they have of succeeding. Better education for the women while they're in prison to help get better jobs or higher paying jobs, of course, would help keep them out of that type of scenario too. So
Okay, thank you. The next question. The right to vote is the basis of our democracy. Idaho voters have access to absentee ballots, drop boxes, early voting, and election day registration. Yet Idaho's new voter ID laws are disenfranchising students, seniors, and nursing home residents. Idaho's Constitution provides voters the right to change laws through referendum or initiative. Some legislators support limiting or removing this. How will you protect voting rights and voter accessibility? Please explain if you support citizen-led initiatives and referenda. Representative Manwaring.
Well, thank you for this question about voting. It's fundamental to our democracy or our representative democracy, and as legislators, we're only as good as that public confidence in the system and those that elect us. And I think the best thing that I can do to ensure that protection of voting rights is to do partly what we've been doing over the last several years, and that's adding initiatives, every initiative that can add sunshine into the process, the election process, and those that are participating, and clarity and add confidence, like some of the election audits that the Secretary of State's office now does post-election, I think are excellent things that they do publicly. They take a certain amount of the election results every time, and you can watch it live. They spin a little ball like the lottery. They pull out certain districts and they audit those, and they do it all publicly. And I think those are the types of integrity into the process that adds assurance that our elections can be trusted. And I have confidence that Idaho does it right with respect to elections. I understand the concern with some of the limitations on voter IDs and things like that, but at the same time, the legislature has tried to provide ways for students and those that can't afford to get an ID to go get an ID so that they can participate in the process. I do support the other part of this question was about citizen-led initiatives and referendums. I do support that process. There's been a lot of critique of the citizen initiative or referendum process. Medicaid expansion is an example of a voter initiative that we recently had and was successful on the ballot. And so I just give that as an example of where that's an example of, frankly, where I disagreed at the time of how it was presented to voters regarding the cost. And I really felt at the time that it would exceed cost estimates and by a lot, and that frankly has come true. But at the same time, I respect the will of the voters, and I think that that's a process that, the voters want that we're going to try to. I have publicly stated already, even as recent as a few weeks ago, that I would not support a repeal of Medicaid, but looking for cost containment. And so I do support that process. I think the will of the voters at the ballot box, having that direct right, is something fundamental and something in our history of Idaho that we've supported.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Guthrie.
Well, thank you. I'll start off by saying that I'm a big fan of Secretary McGrain, and I believe he has done an amazing job to ensure election integrity, and I believe it is at a high level in Idaho. The problem becomes perception a little bit when you look at the evidence of election integrity problems in many other states, which I think did happen. So as a result of that, a lot of lawmakers see goblins here in Idaho that I don't know as they exist here. I do chair the Senate State Affairs Committee, which is where the election legislation comes through. And if we're going to have a public hearing, that's where it would be. And so I have a little bit of a role as a gatekeeper to help at least maybe check some of that up or tweak some of that or try to, soften the edges on some of that policy that compromises that reasonable citizen access to this process. As far as the initiatives and referendums, yes, I support them both. And over the years, I voted at times to adjust the requirements as what it's going to take to get something on the ballot. But I've also vigorously fought against measures that would make that citizen-led process unrealistically to achieve. In fact, last year alone, there were 2 bills that were in my committee that would have basically eliminated that opportunity that we held up and didn't hold hearings on. Remember, as legislators, if an initiative or referendum passes, first week of the session, we can undo what the citizens took a lot of signatures and a lot of time and effort to put into law. So it kind of begs the questions for me is how much power do we need? And that's why I think it's important that they have that say on some of these critical issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. I disagree that the Idaho voting system disenfranchises anyone. Exercising the right of vote requires a voter to make some effort to be included in the system. And I think the Secretary of State, Phil McGrain, as Senator Guthrie said, I'm a great fan. I think he does a great job of providing those opportunities and security and integrity for the voting process. I do support citizen-led initiatives and referendums. And further, I strongly support legislative action to codify those voter mandates if they're successful and leave them in place and don't go against the will of the people.
Thank you very much. Representative Garner.
I think that the voting is a fundamental right that we need to protect. I wouldn't support anything that did away with the absentee voting. I think it's paramount that we have that for our military personnel and our elderlies that are shut in and have a hard time getting to the ballot on election day. They have every right to have their votes counted just like everyone else does. I'm glad that I'd also wouldn't want them to limit the hours any more than they already are on when the ballots are open. We already have a hard enough time getting people to come out and vote. We need to make it easier for them to come out and vote. As for the initiatives and referendums, I totally support them and agree that we need them, and we need to have that voice of the people to be able to tell us what they are wanting and then try to codify them after they are there. And that's how I feel. I'd have anything hurt him. I should add that Phil McGrain, don't forget our county clerks. Our county clerks spend hours getting the votes counted and doing a great job.
Thank you very much. Senator Ruchte.
Yes, maybe I'll start where Dan left off. Julie Hancock is our elections clerk here in Bannock County and just does a phenomenal job. And although I like to think she's kind of unique and better than the other county elections clerks, I suspect that every county thinks highly of their elections clerks. They're professionals. They take this very seriously. I don't mind occasional, criticisms of the voting process and how it works, because I think we need to watch for problems. And if it makes the system tighten up and make sure that it's doing, it's accurate and we're getting accurate vote counts, et cetera, I think that's good. We have gone, in my opinion, way beyond that over the last several years. There's been, almost a paranoia amongst some legislators about problems with the election systems or the voting machines. The list goes on. They just see a lot of boogeymen where there just really aren't any. And I think that's a problem. Because they, sometimes when you highly criticize something, you create a new narrative, and people who don't know differently will use the narrative as the reality, which it certainly isn't. Initiatives and referenda, they really aren't used that often in Idaho. They're really hard to get on the ballot. And usually when they are used, it's because the Idaho legislature just isn't listening. So whether that was term limits in the 90s or Medicaid expansion, great example. It was a highly popular program that people wanted, and the legislature ignored it year after year. And finally, the people took it into their hands in 2018 and passed it by 61%. And it's only become more popular since. So anyway, they're an important way for the people to have their voice heard.
Thank you very much. The next question. The 2022 abortion ban has led to many obstetricians leaving Idaho. labor and delivery units closing, and women requiring emergency transport to access out-of-state care. Most Idahoans support broad access to reproductive health care, including abortion. What amendments to the law could you support to protect the health of pregnant women with complications? Will you support the initiative to expand women's reproductive rights? Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, that's quite a topic, I'll tell you. The short answer, would I support some amendments? Yes. And I'm on record as supporting exemptions for mom victims and doctors, and I'm on record several times stating that. And I've talked at length with healthcare providers, doctors, and their lobbyists who are working on legislation right now to mitigate the problems that you have outlined in your question. The problem is the polarized nature of the issue and how political it is. You know, it used to be the litmus test was somebody would ask you, are you pro-life or pro-choice, with disregard to the nuances surrounding women's health care needs. Now, I'm pro-life, and while I did not support Roe versus Wade, once it was overturned, the pendulum has now swung to a problematic posture, in my opinion. And retreating from current policy that we have now is seen by many lawmakers as surrendering their pro-life card, so to speak. Now, I disagree with that because supporting and protecting moms and victims and indirectly doctors, in my opinion, is being pro-life too. And I strongly believe there's a balance that reasonable lawmakers can arrive at, but it'll take courage. And it's just like, if you mentioned it, it's like kryptonite in that building up there. A solution to this problem has been worked on for years. We've tried to introduce legislation, at least to get a print hearing on some of this. And it's just met with a lot of people get their hackles up over it. We'll see if this year's any different. I have a little more confidence this year, but we'll see. As far as what I support on the ballot, I would sooner see us solve it in the legislature. But I think one thing the initiative might do, if it passes by a wide margin, it might provide that motivation. And I'm actually anxious to see if that does make it, to see what the results would be of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. You know, I've met with doctors and hospitals about women's health issues several times over the last couple of years, as Senator Guthrie indicated. I think solutions to the issues in Idaho need very careful crafting to allow physicians to make the decisions necessary to protect both a fetus and a mother, because seconds and minutes matter in what could be a life and death situation. I also feel like there's been a bit of a mellowing since the harsh talk we had a couple of years ago. But what I'm sure of is that I'm not qualified to create solutions to this issue. I'm not a physician. I'm not a healthcare worker. These things are way out of my wheelhouse, but I will carefully read legislation proposed for solutions and be in favor of common sense answers. I am not familiar with the initiative that's being circulated. I've not seen a copy of that yet, so I shan't comment.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Thank you. I've got to agree with Senator Guthrie wholeheartedly. I am pro-life, but I hate where we're at right now, where physicians are scared to even treat a mother that needs the treatment that she needs to get. I think that the initiative, I'm like Representative Cheatham, I haven't seen it, so I can't say if I support it or not, but I will say I'm glad it's there, because I think it'll make us legislators have the conversation and look at it realistically. As Senator Guthrie said, you'd try and start a conversation and they'd say, well, that's already covered. Yeah, that's in there. Well, if it's in there, let's go look at the bill and clarify it and make sure it's in there and make sure it's understandable. As many as these doctors and hospitals that I've gone to and talked to, they say, we don't know what we can and can't do. Well, let's spell it out and make it clear what they can and can't do, and at least start there. And but I will say I am pro-life. I think it's imperative that we have that. But at some point, you've got to let the doctor and the clergy, the religious clergy, weigh, and the family members weigh which life is more important, because sometimes those things come up.
Senator Ruckte.
Thank you. I'm glad Dan mentioned the danger of uncertainty. You know, we've made so many changes in our abortion laws and women's health care laws in the last few years. I think it's created a lot of confusion as doctors and other medical providers are trying to get on top of things. I spoke with Jake Erickson. He's the CEO of Bingham Memorial Hospital, and he told me this story that I just found fascinating because it kind of says it all. He said that he got a call on a Saturday from an emergency room doctor who was going to have to provide a woman an emergency abortion. As they evaluated the situation, knowing that they had to show, imminent death in order to qualify for performing the abortion without criminal liability or a lawsuit. They were satisfied that they had reached that threshold, talked to the CEO about it. The CEO got on the phone, called their attorney, who's just happened to pick up the phone. He was at a soccer game for his kids. They walked him through the situation so the attorney could tell the doctor whether he could perform that procedure. Then once the doctor that was going to perform the procedure was satisfied that he'd taken care of all that, he had to go back and talk to the anesthesiologist and say to the anesthesiologist, now you got to make a call. I'm doing it. I'm satisfied, but you've got to make your own determination. That's what happens when we meddle with these laws and we have legislators and attorneys trying to make decisions that should only be made by doctors and their patients.
Thank you. Representative Manwaring.
So first on this one, I just want to say I'm opposed to abortion with limited exceptions for the life and the health of the mother, specifically for instances of rape, incest, or abuse. What we currently have is a life exception, and that's been discussed for abortion. And that protects doctors when the life of the mother is at risk. But what we don't have is a health exception. And that's what makes that complicated decision that Senator Ruckte again just spoke of. And when we have a really critical situation, we don't have a health exception, and that's where the abuse can come in. And that's what it's very difficult to create language. And I think what we've seen the legislature do the last few years is kind of punt this issue down while this has been litigated in the courts all the way to the Supreme Court. And I think now that that's sort of been resolved to the extent that it probably will be for a little while, we need to add that clarification. It's time for us to see if we can create some language to make sure that we have some health. So when there truly is those exceptions for health complications, specifically issues like carrying a non-viable fetus to term, that we can add clarifications to the law so we can support mothers and enable doctors to do their jobs without fear of prosecution. Do I support the initiative now in process? I've read that initiative and I don't support the substance of it for the reason that I do not support elective abortion and terminating a pregnancy. Our state, I believe, has a compelling government interest in protecting life, including mothers and unborn babies. And so I do not believe that reproductive freedom, including the right to terminate a pregnancy, with the limited exceptions, I do not believe in the reproductive freedom that should include the right to terminate pregnancy with those limited exceptions that I have spoken of already.
Thank you very much. Now to our next question. To meet Idaho's growing need for power, Governor Little is promoting nuclear energy. Alternative energy sources like wind and solar are not only safe, but are the fastest and cheapest forms of energy generation. Some state legislators mandate that their utilities provide a certain amount of renewable energy power. Will you promote in-state renewable energy generation? If so, how? Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. I will support renewable energy generation projects where they're applicable. I had lunch with Commissioner Huff yesterday, and we talked about the ordinance the county is currently going through to permit some of those projects in Bannock County. And it's not as easy as just saying, I want a windmill or a solar panel. When you start getting to the quantity, there's a lot involved in transmission lines, in substations. There's a lot of infrastructure necessary to make use of those projects. And I think local jurisdictions we need to make sure that whatever decisions are made on those, local jurisdictions have the ability to use those and decide if they're applicable to that location. I also enthusiastically support nuclear energy. INL is currently researching the use of recycled nuclear waste to power small modular reactors. And I think that is the future of energy around the world. France is currently 100% powered by nuclear energy. I strongly feel that's the long-term solution to the increased energy needs we're facing. I do not know what renewable energy credits are or how they work, and I would have to understand that before I can say I would endorse them in Idaho.
Thank you. Representative Garner.
Thank you. I also like renewable energy, and I would support it. It bothers me that it's subsidized so heavily. If it's such a great idea, I would hope it could stand on its own 2 feet. The one thing that I have never understood is why hydropower isn't considered renewable energy. I wholeheartedly support dams for energy, and the idea of taking out for snake dams I just can't fathom it. The problem you have with some of the renewable energy is that you get that not in my backyard syndrome going on, and then you don't want to take up the good farmland. Let's make sure we put it on the land that's best suited for that. Energy is definitely a problem for Idaho. We need to be careful of what we do and try and protect our ratepayers. I bring a House Bill 395 last year that would have done that. I expect to see some form of that bill come forward again this year. And Idaho needs energy, but I do support nuclear. I think we need to look into that, and they've got new technology coming out that I support, and I'd like to see that be expanded.
Thank you. Senator Brachte.
Yeah, so I do support and will promote in-state renewable energy generation. I don't suggest that I am super knowledgeable about renewable energy or energy generally. I mean, I suppose, know as much as the next guy, but I am the co-chair of the Energy and Technology Caucus, which is we hold meetings and try to educate legislators on energy, nuclear, Idaho power issues, hydro and renewable energy. And I think the meetings are really well attended. Legislators, I think, just enjoy learning about things and things that they don't know that much about. And so I think that's why a lot of us show up, is we're just trying to figure out, what can we do? How can we provide more energy sources to citizens of the state of Idaho? So generally, I'm in support of renewable energy. In fact, Dustin and I just met with Renewable Northwest to learn a little bit about it here in Pocatello. Devil's in the details, so depends on the proposal and what we're talking about.
Thank you very much. Representative Manwaring.
Well, I think this is the one issue that I think in Idaho that probably is the most important, but lacks the depth of knowledge and leadership that it needs in Idaho going forward. Energy is so critical to Idaho and our needs from just the individual to the business interests and farmers, everybody in between. This affects. And so I'm a strong advocate for all sources of energy development and expanding electricity generation and our transmission capacity. With respect to introducing legislation for renewable energy credits and imported energy, I think this is a good proposal, but it's also a cost question. But I also think we should first put all of our effort and policy focus on making sure we can build out capacity in state, and so that we're not purchasing electricity out of state unless we need to. However, I also understand that electricity, the energy market works like a lot of other commodities, and electricity is bought and sold based on demand and cost. And so one of the best ways we can lower that cost, like I said, is increasing, we just need more capacity. And so that's why, I am a strong advocate for exploring this credit and promoting the renewable nature of this credit, because I think renewable energy is going to be one of the fastest ways that we build out that capacity. As we get nuclear up and running and other things going forward, we're going to have some steps to get there. And so, I would support that, but I think the number one thing is that we're going to make sure we're creating just more options and more transmission capacity. And our utilities are working on that, and I support their effort. And I'm going to continue to work hard to make sure we're building out transmission and capacity in Idaho.
Thank you very much. Senator Guthrie.
Thank you. Like any business, a diversified portfolio is just smart business, and those that provide our electricity needs have demonstrated they subscribe to that business model. I think renewables have a place, but the challenge is cost effectively managing that diversity. When they have to accept renewables like wind or solar, or those kind of things, they have to adjust the water flows through a dam or through a generator. They have to take a gas plant up or down, which can cause some operational challenges. So it's not, as maybe as rosy as one might think for them to manage that load. The other thing is, it's been mentioned that the renewables have received government provided incentives, which gives us maybe a less than clear picture as cost per kilowatt hour when you look at other generation options. And I understand the perceived risk with nuclear and some of the hesitation, but technology is changing, and I'm a strong believer that nuclear must be an integral part of our future energy portfolio. At this point on the credits, I wouldn't be one to take the lead on that, to require that those be purchased. To say that, and I've said this before, to say that wind and solar are clean and green and cheap is misleading, in my opinion. And building those facilities requires mining and manufacturing that don't get factored into the equation, along with the disposable costs and the landfill costs. And what do you do with the once those batteries are no good, and some of the waste that from that? So I think we've got to have an honest discussion with all the variables and kind of get a better picture of what that carbon footprint is before we get enamored with electric powering everything. I think we've kind of taken that almost to a fault position without maybe a little more thought put into it. I think that if we think that it doesn't impact the environment negatively, I just don't subscribe to that. And we've got to get a better handle on just what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now to our next question. Medicaid work requirements and reduced Affordable Care Act subsidies are leaving more Idahoans without health care coverage. Medicaid and children's health insurance cover 20% of Idaho's population. The budget deficit places Medicaid, child care, welfare, and mental health services at risk. Do you support the continuation of Medicaid expansion? How will this impact Idahoans' health? Representative Garner.
You gave me a hard one right to begin with.
You bet.
Medicaid expansion, I think, is beneficial for Idaho in a lot of ways. We get about 90% of the funding from the feds, and Idaho only has to come up 10 or 15% of the cost of that. But we've got crisis. So where do we cut? That's why it's so. That's the dilemma. I don't. That's why it's going to be so hard this year. Uh, I have talked to, and I actually talked to one of my hospitals this morning, and they're concerned that without the Medicaid expansion part, and we did away with the indigent care fund that we get used to have for the counties to pick up what didn't, that the hospitals will be, their emergency rooms will be overburdened, and they'll have to write it all off as bad debt, which will put a burden on our rural hospitals more than our urban hospitals. In my district, I've got a couple urban hospitals that are on the verge of shifting away from care to urgent care and not becoming a full hospital. That's very concerning to me in my district. I worry about that, and so for that reason, I think I support keeping the Medicaid expansion. It affects too many of our Idaho citizens, and we don't have a safety net for them. We did away with that. So I guess that's where I'm at on it. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you. Senator Ruckte.
Yeah, so I will continue to fight for Medicaid expansion. I mentioned earlier this was an issue that the voters wanted the legislature to pass for 2 or 3 years before the voters finally just brought it as a referendum, excuse me, as an initiative, and it passed at about 61%, which is extraordinary. If we were to get rid of Medicaid expansion, there'd be about 90,000 Idahoans who would instantly lose their insurance, their health insurance. And it's not like they don't go get treatment. It's just that they end up getting very expensive treatment. It's in hospitals. And, the hospitals may eat some of those costs, but what they end up doing is somehow integrating it into their contracts with Blue Cross, Blue Shield, etc. Blue Cross Blue Shield then increases its premiums. You and I end up paying that if we have insurance. So everybody ends up paying. And then, your rural hospitals, we know, and Dan mentioned this, we know that we have rural hospitals that are just barely operating on the margins. If they lose Medicaid patients, Medicaid monies, it'll take them under. So the loss of Medicaid expansion and then the ripple effect that it has, things going on at the federal level, is just going to have an extraordinary effect on everyday Idahoans who just want health care so they can live their lives. And then it's already been mentioned that when we went to Medicaid expansion, we got rid of our county indigency funds. So, there's no safety net to pick up those costs. So I'll continue to support Medicaid expansion.
Thank you very much. Representative Manwaring.
So I've already said tonight that I do similarly support the voter initiative process that expanded Medicaid to more Idahoans. But at the same time, Medicaid expansion is causing a direct strain on our state budget. And so while we may be getting a supposedly good deal where the feds are paying 90% of those funds, that 10% is $200 million. And so that's a huge amount of our state budget, and that's a real issue that we're trying to deal with. And so, I really believe in trying to get more people covered with health care up front before they hit those cost centers like with the hospitals. But the reality is that our state is taking on a significant increased burden in providing health coverage. And the problem is fundamentally that we don't talk about enough, and this isn't just an Idaho problem, is the cost of health care is significant. It costs a lot of money to provide health care, and those costs are going up not just for our Medicaid population, but the cost of insurance for everybody. But having 20% of our population on Medicaid and child health care program is a significant portion of our population. And so we need to do more to reduce this number of Idahoans that are on Medicaid and how long they need that support. We can't continue to fund this even if it's 10%. We've got to figure out ways to contain costs. So I'm going to support Medicaid expansion and continuing to have people to have health care they need, but we've got to do more that we can do, and our hands are tied behind our back, frankly, with the federal government on this. There's not a lot more we can do, but I'm doing everything we can to contain costs because it's a significant portion of our state budget.
Thank you very much. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, Representative Manwaring mentioned the cost explosion in Medicaid expansion, and that is certainly a huge concern. But recognizing the absence of a credible option, I'll continue to support Medicaid expansion as well. I've talked to a lot of providers over the last few months, and we're already seeing the impacts of the 4% cut in Medicaid, in addition to the elimination altogether of some of the programs. And of course, these providers are on razor thin margins already. And when you look at surrounding states, their reimbursement levels are much higher than what they get here in Idaho. And I have appealed to the Department of Health and Welfare, the governor's office, and asked them to reconsider some of these cuts, but to no avail. And I suspect that budget shortfall, with the budget shortfall, things may even get worse for them. The need won't evaporate. It's already been mentioned, and it's in there. It'll just put more pressure on the emergency rooms, law enforcement, mental health services, and it'll raise the cost of your and my insurance because the healthcare providers have to be made whole somehow, and if the money's not in one place, they'll try to get it in another. In fact, the healthcare costs for our state employees is projected to go up $130 million this year, and so it's already been mentioned. It isn't just Medicaid; it's across the board. Healthcare in the country is just completely out of control. I do believe that the Department of Health and Welfare provides, what they can. They'll do the very best they can with the funding they get, but it's going to be a problem. There's a budget hole, we've talked about, and you can pick your own number, but it's going to be significant. One that was at least in part self-inflicted and in a strong economy, and which is unfortunate because normally we face these cuts during problematic financial times. But I think in particular, this issue has a potential to really be something that's going to cost us down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. Medicaid expansion has been a very valuable tool in providing medical care to those without insurance or self-pay alternatives. If we remove a portion of the population from the Medicaid expansion program, we're not really decreasing their need for medical care. That isn't going to go away. We're simply moving the burden of the cost of that medical care to hospital emergency rooms and other far more expensive care systems. I've met with some hospitals, some rural hospitals. They talk about their net profit margins over the course of a year run between 1.5% and 2%. And we ordered a 4% cutback to help balance the budget. I've been meeting with mental health professionals across Bannock County, and the portion that was cut from that budget should save the state about $20 million. The current estimates are between the hospitals and law enforcement and first responders, the cost is going to go up about $8 million for Bannock County alone. So we haven't saved money. We've simply moved the financial burden other places. And I have to agree with what's been said. When you're at the end of this line, you're the last one to speak. Sometimes there's not a lot left to be said. But I think that the Medicaid expenses, the insurance costs that we're covering through the state, they've got to be a part of the overall budgetary issues that we're going to consider this season. Somehow we've got to reckon all of these things together into what the state can afford and the revenue that we have to spend.
Thank you very much. Now we're down to our last question before we go off air with KISU. So I'm going to ask you a big favor. Make your answers succinct so we can get everything in. Say what you need to say, and here we go. Idaho households are paying more to maintain their standard of living due to unaffordable housing and current low wages. House leaders have proposed more than $400 million in tax relief through income tax cuts, which favor wealthier families. Discuss legislative actions on the rising cost of living, the funding required, a timeline, and how you will measure success. Senator Ruckte.
Yeah, I wish I wish the answer was we could solve that problem this year, but here's the reality. We have dug ourselves a hole because of these tax cuts. Again, $4 billion over the last 5 years in income tax alone, $450 million last year, a tax cut last year. We could not afford it, and the benefits of it went mostly to corporations and the super rich. If you made, you're in the 90th percentile, you were probably getting $35,000 a year savings. If you were some of the poorer in the state, you were probably getting about $35 in tax savings. So, we've kind of created a situation where we can't work on affordability. I would have loved during the time that we had surpluses if we would have invest that money in childcare to make childcare more affordable. If we would have put it into housing to make housing more affordable. But that's not where we are right now. We're going to have to dig ourselves out of this. And then maybe once we've done that, and hopefully the economy sticks with us, we can turn to fixing some of these problems.
Thank you very much. Representative Manwaring.
Well, it's true. The legislature can't solve all the cost of living problems or even very many of them, but we do have some big ones and levers that we can pull with regards to healthcare and childcare and housing. I specifically have worked on a local level on a pilot program to get that up and running with United Way of Southeast Idaho. We're calling it TriShare. Some of you may have heard of it. But that's a model for funding where parents, employers, and public funds help share the costs and support that affordability gap for childcare in Bannock County. If we can successfully find a model like TriShare that works, I think that's going to be a direct way that we can lower the cost of living for Idaho families who pay nearly all of their paychecks to housing, childcare, and insurance.
Thank you very much. Senator Guthrie.
Yeah, I'll just try to catch a few things here. In addition to the self-inflicted part we've talked about and the big, beautiful bill that's going to cause some financial things, and then not to pass the buck, but when you look at what happened at the federal level years ago when they didn't raise interest rates when they should have, they let inflation get out of control. COVID came along and we had supply chain issues, and that just exacerbated everything, and prices went up, and now we're at a new normal that none of us like. And so that's those prices aren't going to come back down, I don't believe. And so locally, the other thing that I think has driven this problem is we're growing so fast, and we hear politicians bragging all the time about fastest growing state in the nation. Well, I don't subscribe to thinking that's something we should be bragging about. Methodical growth is fine, but when you have explosive growth at prices, especially for the younger folks and the less affluent, homes and other essentials are out of reach now. In fact, rents are just sky high, and it's just we're in a situation that's partially created of our own doing and partially created by growth and partially created by federal policy. When you have that kind of growth, you can't ignore the fact that it puts pressure on every aspect of your infrastructure, including our water that we've talked about. And I think we've got to start being more pragmatic about incentives that we provide for growth and saying to ourselves, hey, we're a great state. If you want to come, you're going to pay your fair share. You're welcome to come, but we've got to maybe tap the brakes a little bit on these incentives.
Thank you very much. Representative Cheatham.
Thank you. I don't have any proposals to control the cost of living. I don't think that's a state government function. I'm part of that TriShare group that Dustin Manwaring talked about a few minutes ago, and it's a local solution to a local problem that exists statewide, but maybe we've got a pilot program going that will work statewide that will help some people in certain situations. I have people this last week, surprisingly, everybody's talking about these budget issues in private conversations. I have people telling me they expect to pay taxes. They can't understand why these continued income tax reductions are coming along when they amount to hundreds of millions of dollars statewide, but to an individual with an average income, it's $10 or $15 a month. It doesn't amount to any big savings, and I don't think is stimulating the economy for the average Idahoan. So I think we need to get a handle on our revenue sources and moderate our expenses as much as possible and understand it's going to hurt for a few years to dig our way out of the hole we've put ourselves in.
Thank you very much, Representative Garner.
Thank you. I've got to build on the back of what Senator Guthrie said. I think the growth is what's actually hurt the cost of housing in our area. When you look at houses and the apartments in other places other than Idaho, you can still find them cheap. Idaho, you can't. I think it's going to be a hard fix, and we got to look at it from all angles, but a lot of it can be addressed by the cities and counties by changing their planning and zoning or their regulations on multi-housing condominiums, fourplexes, stuff like that. It's going to take a combined effort to solve this problem because Idaho has grown so fast. It's just one of the problems that came from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've all been wonderful this evening. That's all the time we have for our recording on KISU. The forum recording will be available on YouTube and at KISU.org. To contact the League, go to lwvid.org. As Lottie E. Scarfman once said, democracy is not a spectator sport. To that end, remember your voice matters. League encourages you to contact your legislators at legislature.idaho.gov with your comments and questions. Sincere thanks to all our legislators for participating this evening. We also appreciate KISU for airing this event live. Have a good evening from League of Women Voters of Pocatello.